Mr. Polumbo, it's awesome that you could come here on such short notice. How much did they pay you to do it?
A lot.
I'll give you a moment. Yes, absolutely.
Can you explain, Michael, why you want the government to be the arbiter of truth, to decide what beliefs? I mean, I've lived through the government tell us there were WMDs in Iraq, lie to us every which way about COVID, and you are saying that the government and the people that run it should be an arbiter of truth and then should involuntarily commit and basically lock people up who don't meet their perception of the truth. Can you explain to me, as a matter of prudence, how that could possibly be a good idea?
Well, I'm not.
I'm a senior at Point Park University. It's probably about 15 minutes from here. The school made headlines last year for their implemented pronoun mandate, saying that if students told you what their pronouns are and you didn't abide by that you can get in trouble through administration. It being a private university, how do you recommend not only fighting back against that rule, but having students who are mainly liberal on that campus kind of see your side of that argument?
I think I agree with Michael. They're a private school. They can have stupid anti-free speech policies if they want, but I think you should transfer. Yeah, so I think the question is not so much can we or can we not restrict this. It's should we? And I would just say, do you want your own life restricted? Do you want government officials writing rules about what clothing you're allowed to wear? I mean, I think of it, the COVID experiment reminded to me the importance of bodily autonomy and medical freedom. I don't understand how people can, on one hand, and I'm assuming some of Michael's positions here, but rail against COVID vaccine mandates, be outraged that the government would tell you you have to take an injection, and I was, but then also think the government should be able to tell you whether or not you can take testosterone pills. Be outraged at the idea of being forced to wear a mask, but think the government should be able to tell you you can't dress a certain way in public. To me, there's a total cognitive dissonance here. I want to live in an America where adults, as long as they're not hurting anybody else, can live their lives how they see fit. Michael apparently wants to live in a sort of majority rules type of you'll live your life the way the majority of people think you should America, which again, isn't going to work out for a minoritarian social conservative faction in a country that's becoming more pro-LGBT, becoming less religious, becoming less traditionalist. It's just not going to work out well for you.
As I've been listening, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems that I'm hearing that there's two different ideologies with each individual. Mr. Polumbo, from what I'm hearing, it sounds like more of a relativistic ideology. Mr. Knowles, it sounds more of this basis that there's a truth that is real and that everyone can discover. So that brings me to the question of the thought that maybe the real question should be, what is truth? Otherwise, it seems like the conversation just keeps going back and forth without finding a tangible outcome. Do you think this topic can be decided before answering the question, what is truth?
Mr. Polumbo, to you first.
Yeah, I think I'd push back on the idea that I'm like a relativist, that I don't believe every person, like I hate the phrase like your truth, or I do think there is a truth. I think we're all imperfect and unable to perceive the perfect truth. And I guess what I'm arguing is not that there is no truth, but just that the idea of having society or the government top down decide what the truth is and impose it on all of us is antithetical to what I see as human discovery and flourishing, but also to the actual discovery of getting closer to the truth. Because when what is believed to be true is forced on people and different ideas, wrong ideas mostly, are suppressed, that actually leads to less discovery of getting closer to the ultimate truth. That's what we see. That's why things that were considered complete conspiracy theories a year or two ago are now like, oh yeah, that probably happened. And so that's why I would say it's not that I don't believe there is a truth, It's that I believe that decentralizing truth-seeking is the best approach to get us as imperfect beings closer to it. Yeah, so I think it's both. I don't fully agree with Michael's positions, but also from a pure tactical position, I would say it's wrong to run on the opposite extreme. A good example of this is, you want to use the abortion context. I live in Michigan. We had a governor candidate there, Tudor Dixon, who ran on no abortion exceptions, no rape, no incest, life of the mother maybe. She lost terribly. It was every single ad because that was a wildly unpopular position. And as a result, those are like 2% of abortions or whatever. You could have had a governor that would have worked to restrict 98% of abortions, and instead you have Gretchen Whitmer. So you're not going to convince me that just taking the most extreme position because it's honest or because you believe it fully, it's naive if your goal is to actually achieve change. I'm also, of course, just coming at it from a fundamentally different premise in which, look, I believe there's two biological sexes. They are immutable. But there's a lot that we attach to gender that is social. And if someone like Blair White, who I consider an acquaintance and am friendly with, if she wants to live as a woman, have surgery as she has, if that's what will make her happy, and she struggled with deep depression and mental issues, and then that helped, why would I object to that? And moreover, why would I embrace some sort of one-size-fits-all government approach that would legally force somebody with C-cup tits to use the men's room and the boys' locker room? It doesn't make any sense. But I don't think that is the question. I think the question is who gets to decide. And you would have the government decide for everyone, and I would have people decide for themselves in their own law.
Let me ask you then, Mr. Polumbo. One question the government does make a decision on that arguably is a murkier question is, when is someone legally, morally, intellectually an adult?
Right.
And that's something where the government cannot remain silent. We write a lot of laws to draw a relatively sharp line between children and adults, even though nothing magical happens on your 18th or 21st, or for the purposes of running for Congress, I think 25th birthday. But the law has to speak. So how do you think about when the law has to draw a distinction? How do you want it to draw it?
I think that 18 is an imperfect legal age of adulthood, but it's the one we have, and we should stick to it. You're either an adult or you're not. And once you're an adult, you have the full freedoms and rights and responsibilities that come with our society, and that should include living your life in a way that traditionalist conservatives don't approve of, think is wrong, think is gross, think is bad. But for minors, I think it is fair to talk about not nearly enough safeguards on this care. I question whether they can even consent to it at all.
But I think I have a better sense right now from Mr. Knowles about how he would work through the anthropological question of when should the law set that limit. You say you're comfortable with the current one. Are you comfortable with 19? If the country were with you?
I mean, it's inherently arbitrary. I would say it just has to be consistent. Right now we kind of have a patchwork of things, like 21 for some things, 18 for some things, 17 for some things. I agree it will be fundamentally arbitrary. I just think it should be consistent. So it could be 18, it could be 19, it could be 21. What irks me is when it's inconsistent.
Well, what I'm asking you just for a moment is, there's the question of is it inconsistent and the question of is it correct? And I'm curious, what do you draw on to answer the question of is it correct? You're trying to draw them to some common number, but maybe you want that one to be right.
Yeah.
Where do you get your account of the human person to decide what it means to pass into maturity?
I think what we're talking about when we talk about a legal age of adulthood is your ability to fully understand what's going around you, your brain development, your ability to inform consent to something, right? And I don't have a great way of drawing the line that's not kind of arbitrary, but you do have to draw it somewhere. So a few points to touch on there, but as to the question of polling, the American public's view on these issues is pretty nuanced, but I could also show you polls that say 60, 70% of Americans believe in anti-discrimination protections for transgender people. In fact, I think the eradicate transgenderism from public life position, even as Michael describes it, not as his critics do, is not going to poll high in America. And if all you have to offer to one extreme is the opposite extreme, you're actually making that opposite extreme more likely to succeed. Imagine if instead of running against gun control, you had to run on let people own nukes. Imagine if instead of running on let's not do socialism, you had to run on abolish Social Security, abolish Medicare, abolish everything. obviously you're going to be less successful at actually achieving power, at winning an election, at building a consensus to accomplish what you want to accomplish, which in our case, for example, is protecting children, protecting fairness in sports, these kinds of things, if all you're offering is the complete and opposite extreme. And that's what Knowles and his company are offering. As far as bodily integrity disorder or the benefits to transition supposedly not existing, I'm not here to quibble with the scientific data. I'm not an expert in any of that, and neither is Michael. I'm here to say it's not up to us. You're a fully grown adult. It's up to you to decide what's best for you. And as far as chopping off your limbs and bodily disorder, no doctor in their right mind is going to do that. And whether you agree with it or not, it is the case that most doctors, most medical authorities, most medical bodies do recommend transition for adults with persistent gender dysphoria. So I don't view it as my place or our place to get in the way of that relationship. If that's what they want to do, if that's what will make them happy, who are we to second guess it? Who are we to tell them how to live their lives? I don't want the government policing my wardrobe, my speech, what pronouns I use. I don't want the government telling me what I can believe, what I can say, how I can live my life. And if you don't want that, you have to respect that for transgender adults as well.
As I'm worried about
Well,
bathroom
I suppose,
rules.
right. I mean, bathrooms are smaller scale, but what I would say is that these issues are complicated, and they should be decentralized. Let a business decide their own bathroom policies. I've been to a lot of places in liberal cities that solve this by having single-stall unisex bathrooms. Fantastic. Don't have a one-size-fits-all solution
Just
crammed on the whole country.
I'm going to stay on the commitment question for a second, so Mr. Polumbo can field a question himself. Certainly the government does draw lines around some people who should be committed, whether due to risk to others or sometimes risk to themselves. I'm curious how you, Mr. Polumbo, feel the government should respond. Is it right to commit someone for treatment for anorexia, which does not put them as a danger to others, purely because we believe them to be a danger to themselves, to have a false belief about their body?
I think there has to be a very high threshold for civil commitment. We've seen it horribly abused in the past in this country. But I think it has to be a direct danger to themselves or others, right? Their physical safety. So trans or not trans, if somebody is a danger, a suicide risk, or if they're a threat to others, then we can discuss involuntary commitment. But what we're talking about here is essentially saying, well, we think somebody has deluded and wrong beliefs, so they should be locked up. I mean, that would have gotten that's the approach that had people wanting to lock up and kill Galileo, for daring to suggest that the Earth was not the center of the universe. I don't think we all know the truth. That's part of the process of discovering the truth. And let me just say, and I'm not saying this, but a large swath of the country thinks that the Catholic faith, believing in a God, is a deluded belief, is a delusion. Should they want to have you committed?